In the waning days of the Third Age, when shadows still lingered in dark corners of Middle-earth, despite Sauron's defeat, there came word to Rivendell of a mystery most dire. Lord Elrond stood upon his balcony, gazing eastward toward the misty mountain, his ancient eyes troubled by visions that had come to him in dream. 3 moons passed, spoke Elrond to the assembly gathered in his halls. The voices of the Valar have whispered of Nath Baron, the lost Glen of Baron the Bold, which vanished from mortal sight in the elder day. It has stirred from its enchanted slumber, yet none know why, nor what peril this awakening may bring. Among those who heard his words stood Thrandion of the Woodland Realm, eldest son of Legolas, whose keen eyes had inherited his grandfather's sight. Beside him waited Grimjaw Ironfoot, a dwarf of Erebor, whose lineage traced back to Dane's own guard. Most surprising of all was Mithrellas, a woman of Dol Amroth, whose blood bore the mark of ancient Numenor, and whose grandmother had walked in the light of Arundel's ship. The Glen was hidden by the Eldar in the days when Morgoth's shadow first fell upon Beleriand, continued Elrond. Within its bound lies the Covenant Stone of Elendil, lost when Gil-galad fell. Should this artifact fall into corrupt hands, the very foundations of peace in Middle-earth may tremble. Thus was formed the Company of the Lost Glen, sworn to find this hidden veil before others, with darker purposes, might claim its secrets. 7 days after leaving Rivendell, the hunters found themselves in the wild lands of Rhovanion, where few paths were marked and fewer still were safe. The autumn winds carried whispers of ill tidings from the east, and even Thrandian's elven ears could not discern their meaning. The maps speak of naught but wilderness here, grumbled Grimjaw, his axe gleaming as he cleared thorny undergrowth. Yet my stone sense tells me there are old workings beneath our feet, older the kingdoms of men. Mithrellas walked apart from the others, her eyes scanning the horizon with purpose unknown to her companion. In her heart stirred memories not her own, as if the very air of these lands called to something in her blood. "See you nothing strange in her manner?" whispered Grimjaw to the elf. "All who bear the blood of Numenor carry burdens we cannot fathom," replied Thrandion. "Yet I sense no shadow in her heart, only purpose that runs deeper than our quest." That night, as they camped beneath the stars, Mithrellas spoke the first words of power they had heard from her lips. Elendil Varda Nainala Si, and a pale light kindled about their campfire that kept all dark things at bay. "Where learned you such word?" asked Thrandion in wonder. "They come to me as breath comes to the living," she replied. "I know not whence." 3 weeks into their journey, the hunters reached the foothills of the Grey Mountains, where the wind carried more than mere cold. Ancient warnings seemed to echo from stone to stone, and Grimjaw's unease grew with each step. "These peaks remember the dragon wars," he muttered, gripping his axe tighter. "And something else. Something that made even dragons flee." A great eagle circled overhead, and Thrandion spoke to it in the tongue of birds. When the conversation ended, his fair face was grave. "Gwaihir's kin bring word from the north. Strange lights have been seen dancing between the peaks, and the very stones sing lamentations in languages forgotten. We are not the only ones who seek the lost Glen. Indeed, they soon found proof of other travelers, campsites abandoned in haste, and stranger still, footprints that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Some were of men, others of creatures they could not identify. "Shadow walkers," whispered Mithrellas, and her hand moved to the pendant at her throat. "Servants of him who was cast down, yet not destroyed utterly. They seek what we seek, but for darker purpose." That evening, as they sheltered in a cave decorated with ancient dwarvish runes, Grimjaw made a discovery that chilled their hearts. Deep within the stone, carved in letters of fire that only dwarf eyes could perceive, was written, "Here lies the threshold of the lost. Let none pass who cannot speak. The true name of the star, Kindler." For 2 days they pondered the riddle carved in the cavern wall, while outside the cave shadows seemed to gather with increasing malevolence. Thrandian's elven lore was vast, but the title, Star Kindler, appeared in no song or tale he could recall. "In the halls of Erebor, we keep the old stories," said Grimjaw, his fingers tracing the fiery rune. "My grandfather's grandfather spoke of one who lit the first stars, but that was Varda herself, and her true name is not spoken by mortal tongue." Mithrellis sat apart, her eyes closed, lips moving in silent words. When at last she spoke, her voice carried an authority that surprised them all. Not Varda, but her herald, Arundel the Blessed, who bears the Silmaril across the heavens, Gil Estel, the Star of Hope, the Star Kindler who brought light to the darkness when all seemed lost. As she spoke the name Gil Estel, the runes blazed with white fire, and the stone wall groaned and split. Beyond lay a passage that descended into the heart of the mountain, lit by a soft radiance that hurt no eye. "How knew you this?" asked Thrandion, wonder and suspicion mingling in his voice. "The blood, remember," she replied simply, and would say no more. They had not descended far when they heard the sound of pursuit behind them, harsh voices speaking in the black speech, and the clatter of armed feet on stone. The passage led deeper than any of them had imagined possible, winding through halls carved not by dwarf or elf, but by powers older still. The very walls seemed alive with ancient memory, and phosphorescent veins in the rock pulsed like a slow heartbeat. "These are the deep halls," whispered Grimjaw in awe. "My people spoke of them in legend only. They were made in the music of creation itself, when the world was young." Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Their enemies had found the passage and followed without hesitation. But ahead, the corridor opened into a vast chamber where 7 paths diverged, each marked with symbols that predated any known writing. "Choose swiftly," urged Thrandion, his bow strung and ready. "I can hear their voices. At least a dozen. They move with purpose." Mithrellas studied the symbols with eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. "This mark," she said, pointing to a spiral intertwined with a star, "leads to the heart of all things hidden. The others are false paths that lead only to entombment." They plunged down the marked path just as dark figures emerged into the chamber behind them. Arrows whistled overhead, and one grazed Grimjaw's helm, leaving a line of frost that should not exist in these deep places. "Ice arrows," he panted as they ran. "Our enemies wield magics of the cold lands beyond the Sea of Rune." The chosen path led ever downward until they came at last to a door of mithril and gold, inscribed with words in Tengwar that made Thrandian's heart leap. "Here lies the gateway to the Deathless Land," he read. "But that cannot be. The straight road was closed when the world was bent." Before the mithril door, Mithrellas at last revealed the truth that had driven her steps from the beginning. Removing her pendant, she held it high, and its light revealed itself to be a fragment of crystal that sang with the music of the spheres. "I am not merely of Dol Amroth's line," she said, her voice now carrying the authority of one who had walked in starlight. "I am daughter of Nimrodel, who was lost seeking the Grey Havens. She bore within her a shard of the Elisar, given to her by Galadriel before the darkening of Lothlorien." The crystal's light played upon the door, and new words appeared beneath the first. "The road is not to the Deathless Lands, but to their echo in mortal earth. Here lies the heart of the lost Glen, where time flows as it willed before the music was corrupted." As understanding dawned, the door swung open without sound, revealing not the continuation of their underground journey, but open sky and green fields under a sun that shone with the light of elder days. "The Glen lies not in our world, but between worlds," breathed Thrandion, "and we are the first to find it, since its makers sealed it away." They stepped through and found themselves in a valley that should not exist, where flowers bloomed with their own light and streams sang audible melodies. At the valley's heart stood a single stone, tall as a tree and bright as captured starlight. Behind them, their pursuers reached the door and cried out in languages that belonged to no living people. The lost glen spread before them like a vision from the elder days, but they soon learned it was not unguarded. From groves of Malorn trees that should not grow outside Lothlorien came figures that seemed wrought of light and memory. The faithful, Elendil's followers, who had chosen exile from their doomed isle rather than bow to Sauron's shadow. Who would approach the Covenant Stone? Spoke their leader, tall and noble, bearing the seal of the House of Elros upon his breast. Long have we waited for those worthy to take up the burden we have borne. I am Thrandion of the Woodland Realm, replied the elf with all the courtesy due to the ancient line of kings. This is Grimjaw Ironfoot of Erebor, and Mithrelas of— I know who she is, interrupted the guardian, his eyes fixed upon the crystal in her hand. Daughter of the lost, bearer of the shard, last of the pure blood, you have come at the appointed time, when the covenant must be renewed or broken forever. He gestured toward the great stone at the valley's heart. Behold, the last work of Elendil the Tall, wrought in the hour of his greatest despair. When he saw that Gil-galad would fall and the alliance would fail, he bound the future of Middle-earth to this stone, that peace might endure even after the mighty had fallen. The stone stood twice the height of a man, its surface carved with symbols that shifted like living things. Around its base, 7 smaller stones formed a circle, each bearing the mark of one of the free people. But what is the Covenant? Asked Grimjaw, his dwarf practical mind cutting to the heart of matters. A promise, replied the guardian, that should darkness rise again in Middle-earth, the stone would call forth champions to stand against. You are those champions, though you knew it not when you began this quest. The guardian led them to the circle of stone, and as they drew near, each felt a pull upon their very soul. The crystal in Mithrelas's hand blazed brighter, and for the first time since entering the glen, they heard sounds of the world they had left behind, shouts of alarm from their pursuer, and something else, a deep rumbling as of the earth itself awakening. The Shadow Walkers have found another way, said the guardian grimly. They seek to shatter the covenant from without, while you must renew it from within. But know this, the binding requires sacrifice. One of you must take up the guardianship of this place, remaining here until the world's end, or until others come to take your place. Grimjaw stepped forward without hesitation. I am of the line of Durin's folk, and we know something of guarding treasures. If need be— Nay, interrupted Mithrelas, her voice ringing with newfound authority. This burden was laid upon my bloodline long ago. My grandmother Nimrodel was meant to reach this place, but lost her way in grief. I am here to complete her journey. The very air around the Covenant Stone began to shimmer, and through the distortion they could see dark figures pouring through cracks that had appeared in the boundaries of the glen. Ice-touched arrows began to fall like deadly rain. Choose quickly, urged the guardian. The barriers weaken, and once they fall, the glen will be lost forever. But before any could answer, Thrandion made a discovery that changed everything. Carved in letters so small they could barely be read, he found words written in his grandfather's hand. Not sacrifice, but understanding. The covenant binds not one, but all who choose to serve. Speak the oath together, and share the burden as the fellowship shared theirs. As darkness pressed against the weakening boundaries of the glen, the 3 hunters stood before the Covenant Stone and spoke the words that the guardian taught them, while their crystal blade fought a desperate battle to hold back the Shadow Walkers at the valley's edge. By starlight and by stonefire, they said in unison, by the memory of the fallen and the hope of the living, we bind ourselves to the covenant made by Elendil the Tall. While strength remains in our bodies and breath in our lungs, the peace of Middle-earth shall not fail through our neglect. The stone blazed with a light that drove back the encroaching shadows, and the attackers cried out in anguish as their forms began to dissolve. But even as victory seemed assured, the greatest test yet awaited. From the dissolving ranks of their enemies stepped a figure they had not expected, tall and fair, bearing the seeming of an elf lord, but with eyes like winter stars and voice like cold wind over ice. Fools, he spoke, and the very ground beneath their feet trembled. Know you not who I am? I am Glen returned, he who loved darkness more than light, who chose treachery over truth. The covenant you seek to renew was made in ignorance of the greater purpose. Sauron is fallen, yes, but his master stirs in the void, and only through shadow can Middle-earth be saved from the greater darkness to come. The guardian of the Glen drew his blade, ancient beyond measure, liar and betrayer. Glen fell from the walls of Gondolin, and his spirit passed beyond the circles of the world. Did it? Laughed the seeming elf lord. Or was it preserved by powers greater than Gil-galad, or Elendil ever dreamed? I have seen the truth beyond the veil, and I offer it to you. Break the covenant, and I will teach you magic that will preserve your peoples through the darkness that comes. For a moment, doubt crept into their hearts. What if he spoke truly? What if the covenant bound them to a path that led only to greater doom? But Mithrellis, daughter of the lost, raised the crystal shard high, and its light revealed the truth that lay behind the seeming elf lord's fair form. The flesh melted away like mist, revealing a wraith king of the ancient days, one of the 9 who had thought himself destroyed when his ringmaster fell. "I know you now," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one who had walked in the light of the 2 trees, though she had never seen them with mortal eyes. "You are the Witch King's lieutenant, who fled when Minas Morgul fell and sought refuge in the void spaces between the worlds. You feed on doubt and despair, and your words carry no more truth than smoke carries substance." The Wraith King's laughter turned to a shriek of rage. "Then you shall all die here, and the covenant shall be broken by your very destruction." Dark power gathered around him like storm clouds, and the remaining Shadow Walkers rose up renewed, their forms now wreathed in Nazgul fire. The battle was joined in earnest, and it seemed that 3 mortal hunters and 1 ancient guardian could not stand against such malice. But they had forgotten the power of the Glen itself. As their backs touched the covenant stone, strength flowed into them from the earth beneath their feet and the stars above their heads. Thranduil's arrows blazed with elven fire, Grimjaw's axe rang like the bells of Erebor, and Mithrellas spoke words of unmaking that scattered wraiths like leaves before a gale. Yet still the Witch King's lieutenant stood, drawing power from sources beyond the bounds of Middle-earth. With his staff raised high, he began to speak words that would tear the very fabric of the Glen apart. "The stone!" cried the guardian. "Touch the stone together and speak the final word." As the Witch King's lieutenant spoke his words of unmaking, reality itself began to fray around the edges of the lost Glen. The Malorn trees withered, the singing streams fell silent, and even the light of the covenant stone began to dim. The 3 hunters pressed their hands against the ancient monument, and suddenly they were no longer alone. Through the stone flowed the memories of all who had touched it before. Elendil himself in his last hour, Gil-galad as the light faded from his eyes, and 1,000 others who had sworn themselves to the preservation of hope in dark hours. "What is the final word?" gasped Thranduil, as darkness closed around them like a tide. The guardian's voice came as if from a great distance. "It is not a word of power, but of choice. Each who touches the stone must choose to preserve the world as it is, with all its sorrows and imperfections, or to unmake it entirely, that something new might be born from its ashes." "But that is no choice at all," cried Grimjaw. "We did not come so far to destroy what we sought to save." Yet even as he spoke, they felt the terrible temptation. Through the stone, they could see the future spread before them, all the wars and sorrows yet to come, the slow fading of the elves, the decline of Numenor's children, the dwindling of the dwarves. Would it not be kinder to end it all now, before the long defeat began? Mithrellas, her hand burning where it touched the stone, spoke the truth that saved them all. The choice is not ours to make. We are guardians, not gods. The peoples of Middle-earth must write their own ending, whether in triumph or in sorrow. Together, they spoke the final word, and it was simplicity itself. We choose hope. The Wraith King's shriek split the air as his form dissolved utterly. and the glen burst into radiance that could be seen from the Shire to the Sea of Rune. When the light faded, the three hunters found themselves standing once more in the Grey Mountain, at the mouth of a cave that showed no sign of the mithril door they had passed through. The lost glen had returned to its hiding place between the worlds. The Covenant Stone had left its mark upon them all. Each bore now a crystal pendant, like unto Mithralis' shard, which would grow warm when shadow stirred in Middle-earth, and cold when peace prevailed. They were bound now to the Watch Eternal, not as prisoners in a hidden valley, but as guardians who could walk freely through the world. "The glen will call us when the need is dire," explained the guardian, who had chosen to walk with them partway on their return journey. "But until that day, live freely, love deeply, and remember that hope is not the belief that all will be well, but the conviction that all struggles have meaning, regardless of their outcome." Years passed, and the hunters became legend in their own right. Thrandion returned to the woodland realm and ruled wisely when his father at last sailed oversea. Grimjaw became a great leader among the dwarves of Erebor, leading expeditions that opened new roads between the peoples of Middle-earth. Mithralis founded a school in Dol Amroth, where young folk of all races learned the arts of peace and the vigilance of war. They met often in the years that followed, drawn together by bonds forged in starlight and stone fire. And sometimes, in the darkest hours, their pendants would warm and they would know that somewhere the lost glen stirred in its hidden fastness, and hope endured despite all darkness. For the covenant they had renewed was not merely a promise to fight shadow, but a pledge to remember that even in the deepest night, the stars still shine, waiting for eyes with courage enough to see them. Thus ends the tale of the hunters of the Lost Glen, who learned that the greatest treasures are not gold or jewels, but the bonds of fellowship and the light of hope that no darkness can quench forever. In the margins of the Red Book of Westmarch, written in Bilbo's own hand, these words were found. "Some victories are measured not in enemies defeated, but in oaths kept and hope preserved." The hunter's tale reminds us that even the smallest light can hold back an ocean of darkness if it burns with courage enough and is tended by hearts that refuse to despair. And so the story passed into legend, told by firelight in halls both great and small, a reminder that in every age there are those who choose to stand watch in the darkness, that others might wake to see the dawn. Epilogue: The Chronicles of the Watchers, being an account of the years that followed the renewal of the Covenant, as recorded in the Annals of Dol Amroth and the Chronicles of Erebor, with additions from the private journals of Thrandion Thranduilion and the oral traditions of the Woodland Realm. The First Watch, years 1 to 25 after the renewal. In the first years following their return from the Lost Glen, the three hunters found their lives forever changed by the weight of guardianship they now bore. The crystal pendants that hung about their necks were no mere ornaments, but windows into the very soul of Middle-earth itself. Through them, they could sense the ebb and flow of shadow across the world, from the smallest corruption in a village well to the stirring of ancient evils in forgotten places. Thrandion returned to the halls of his father with tales that seemed too wondrous for belief. Yet the change in him was evident to all who knew the woodland realm, where once he had been content with the simple pleasures of forest song and starlight. Now his eyes held depths that spoke of burdens gladly borne. King Legolas, wise in the ways of sacrifice, recognized in his son the same weight that had once settled upon his own shoulders during the War of the Ring. "You have become what I was, and more," spoke Legolas to his eldest son, as they walked beneath the boughs of the great Malorn that grew in the heart of the realm. A guardian, not merely of trees and glades, but of the very hope that keeps darkness at bay. In those early years, Thrandions pendant grew warm thrice, calling him to distant corners of Middle-earth, where shadow stirred. The first summons led him to the borders of Mirkwood, where a cult of men sought to raise an ancient Barrow-wight from its tomb, believing it would grant them power over death itself. Thrandion arrived to find Grimjaw already there, his own pendant having guided his steps, and together they laid the white to its final rest, while the cultists fled into the night. The second summons brought all three hunters together in the ruins of Dol Guldur, where something that had hidden itself deep in the foundations during Sauron's occupation had finally stirred to malevolent life. It was Mithrellas who identified the creature, a lesser Maiar that had been corrupted in the early days of the world and bound to service by the Dark Lord. The battle lasted 3 days and nights, and when it was done, they collapsed the remaining towers of that accursed place, burying the evil so deep that it would trouble the world no more. The third calling was the strangest of all, for it led them not to battle evil, but to preserve good. In the Grey Havens, the last of the ring-bearers prepared to sail into the west, and their departure would leave a void in the spiritual defenses of Middle-earth. The three hunters stood vigil on the quays as the white ship bearing Frodo, Sam, and the last of the Eldar disappeared beyond the horizon, their pendants blazing with such light that sailors spoke of it for generations after. "We are the bridge now," spoke Mithrellas, as they watched the ship fade into the sunset. "Between the age that was and the age that is to come, the elves have given their guardianship into mortal hands, and we must prove worthy of the trust." The second watch, years 26 to 50 after the renewal. As the years passed and the fourth age deepened, the nature of their guardianship evolved. No longer were they called only to battle ancient evils that stirred from slumber. Instead, they found themselves preserving knowledge, protecting the innocent, and nurturing the seeds of hope in an age where the great powers of old had departed. Grimjaw established the Order of the Stone Wardens in Erebor, a brotherhood of dwarves dedicated to the preservation of ancient lore and the protection of the deep places of the world. Unlike the traditional warrior guilds of his people, the Stone Wardens were scholar fighters, equally skilled with hammer and scroll. They maintained correspondence with the libraries of Minas Tirith and the archives of Dol Amroth, creating, for the first time in history, a network of knowledge that spanned all the free people. "Knowledge is the greatest treasure," Grimjaw would say to his students, his beard now silver-streaked, but his eyes still bright with the fire of discovery. "Gold can be stolen, gems can be lost, but wisdom shared among friends becomes a hoard that no dragon can plunder." The Stone Wardens became legendary for their expeditions into the abandoned ruins of the First and Second Ages, recovering artifacts and texts that would otherwise have been lost to time. It was they who rediscovered the lost forges of Khazad-dûm and learned to craft mithril steel, a metal nearly as precious as true mithril, but workable by mortal hand. With this knowledge, they forged weapons and tools that would serve the free peoples for centuries to come. Meanwhile, in the woodland realm, Thrandion pioneered a new form of forest craft that his grandfather Thranduil would have marveled to see. No longer content to merely tend the trees within their borders, the elves, under Thrandion's guidance, began to heal the scars left by centuries of war and darkness. The Emyn Muil, long a haunted wasteland, bloomed with new growth. The marshes near the Black Gate were cleansed and became fertile field that fed the growing populations of Gondor and Rohan. But perhaps most remarkably, Thrandion established the first school of the intermingling, where young elves learned to work alongside men and dwarves, not as separate peoples bound by ancient treaties, but as true partners in the stewardship of Middle-earth. From this school came the great engineers who built the new road between Erebor and the Grey Haven, and the healers who finally cleansed the last corruption from the Barrow Down. The age of isolation is ended, Thrandion proclaimed to the assembled lords of the woodland realm. If the elves are to fade from Middle-earth, let us fade not in sorrow and withdrawal, but in service and love, leaving behind a world more beautiful than the one we found. The third watch, years 51 to 100 after the renewal. It was Mithrellas, however, who achieved the greatest work of the three hunters during these years. Her school in Dol Amroth became more than a place of learning. It became a beacon of hope that drew seekers from across the known world. Here, she developed what came to be known as the art of memory, a technique for preserving not just knowledge, but the very essence of wisdom itself. Using principles derived from her study of the Covenant Stone and her inherited understanding of the crystal shard she bore. Mithrellas learned to encode memories, skills, and even fragments of personality into specially prepared crystal. These memory stones became the foundation of a new kind of inheritance, where the wisdom of the great could be passed directly to their successor, rather than merely described in books. The first and greatest of these memory stones contained the experiences of Aragorn himself, recorded in the final years of his life. Future kings of Gondor would touch the stone and experience, for a brief moment, what it meant to bear the weight of crown and palantir, to feel the love of Arwen Undomiel, and to understand the burden of ruling justly in a world where absolute good and evil had given way to the more complex struggles of mortal governance. Knowledge without wisdom is mere accumulation, Mithrellas taught her students, but wisdom without the experience that birthed it is like a map drawn by one who has never walked the roads it describes. The memory stones bridge that gap, allowing each generation to stand upon the shoulders of those who came before. But the true test of the memory stones came when a plague of despair began to spread through the southern kingdom. It was not a disease of the body, but of the spirit, a creeping hopelessness that left its victims alive, but utterly without will to continue living. Healers were baffled, for there was no wound to tend, no fever to break. The afflicted simply lost all sense that life held meaning or purpose. Mithrellas recognized the plague for what it was, a spiritual poison left behind by the destruction of Sauron's will, a kind of metaphysical vacuum that drew hope and purpose out of those it touched. Working with memory stones that contained the experiences of the greatest heroes of the past, she developed a treatment that restored to the afflicted a sense of connection to something greater than themselves. The cure was neither potion nor spell, but story, not merely told, but experienced through the memory stone. A farmer who had lost all will to tend his fields would touch a stone containing the memories of Sam Gamgee and feel again the simple joy of watching green things grow. A warrior paralyzed by doubt would experience through crystal the moment when Éomer first saw the white ships on the Pelennor and knew that hope had come against all expectation. Within 5 years, the plague of despair was broken, and the memory stones had proven their worth beyond all doubt. But perhaps more importantly, a new understanding had emerged of the true nature of heroism, not as extraordinary deeds performed by legendary figures, but as the simple choice, made again and again, to hope when hope seemed lost. The Fourth Watch, years 101-200 after the renewal. As the Fourth Age progressed, and the first century of the new watch drew to a close, the three hunters found themselves facing challenges they had never anticipated. Their own fame had grown beyond their comfort, and pilgrims came from distant lands seeking their blessing or their wisdom. Worse, some sought to worship them as living saints, forgetting that they were but mortals who had accepted a burden of guardianship. "This is not the way," said Thranduil during one of their triennial meetings, held always on the anniversary of their oath-taking in the Lost Glen. "We swore to guard hope, not to become objects of veneration. The moment we accept worship, we become that which we guard against, powers that claim dominion over the spirits of free people." It was Grimjaw who proposed the solution that would define the next century of their watch. "We must multiply ourselves," he said with typical dwarvish directness, "not in body, but in purpose. If 3 guardians are too few, let us make 30. If 30 are too few, let us make 300. Thus began the Great Awakening, a period when the 3 hunters traveled ceaselessly across Middle-earth, seeking others who might bear the burden of guardianship. They were not looking for the mighty or the magical, but for those who had already proven themselves willing to sacrifice for others without thought of reward. From the Shire came Peregrine Took the Younger, grandson of the Taine, who had spent his youth caring for the memorial gardens where the heroes of the War of the Ring were remembered. His pendant was made from a fragment of the Covenant Stone itself, and it would grow warm whenever any in the Shire faced despair so deep that it threatened to extinguish hope entirely. From Rohan came Dernhelm's daughter, named for the identity her grandmother had taken when she rode to war. She bore a pendant that resonated with the loyalty between horse and rider, and her calling was to protect the bonds that held communities together, whether human or animal. From the forests of Fangorn came a half-ant woman whose parentage was a mystery even to herself, but whose touch could heal the wounds that axes and fire had left on the living world. Her pendant was carved from a branch of the great Malorn of Lothlorien, given freely by the tree itself in recognition of her service. One by one, the new guardians were called and sworn, until there were indeed 30, then 60, then more than could be easily counted. Each bore a pendant of different make and power, but all were connected through the network of watch and ward that flowed from the original Covenant stone. Yet even as their numbers grew, the 3 original hunters found that their own burden did not lessen. If anything, it grew heavier, for they had become the coordinators of hope itself, the central nodes through which the network of guardianship flowed. Their pendants no longer merely warned of local shadows, but blazed with the accumulated concern of all their brother and sister watchers. During this period, they prevented 3 separate attempts to resurrect Sauron through blood sacrifice and dark ritual. They thwarted a plot by surviving Easterlings to poison the wells of Minas Tirith with water drawn from the Morgul Vale. Most critically, they discovered and destroyed a conspiracy among certain lords of Gondor to create a new ring of power, believing that only through dominion could peace be maintained. Power offered for the best of reasons is still power. Mithrelus reminded the assembled lords after the conspiracy was broken, and power, once grasped, shapes the hand that wields it more than the hand shapes the power. This is the lesson that each age must learn anew, for it is the one lesson that can never be taught, only experience. The Fifth Watch, years 201 to 300 after the renewal. As the 3rd century of their watch began, the 3 hunters faced their greatest challenge yet, not from external evil, but from the slow passage of time itself. Thrandion, being of elven kind, remained unchanged by the years, but Grimjaw's beard had turned white as snow, and Mithrela's, despite her Númenórean heritage, showed the first signs of age's approach. The burden was meant to be shared across generations, admitted Grimjaw during a particularly difficult winter council. But we have held it so long that we have forgotten how to set it down. The Watchers look to us for guidance. But what happens when guidance fails? The answer came in an unexpected form. From the far east, beyond even the Sea of Rune, came word of a people who claimed descent from the Blue Wizards, those Istari who had disappeared into the sunrise in the early Third Age. These Khandi, as they called themselves, bore crystals of their own, not pendants, but staves that hummed with a different kind of power. When their ambassadors arrived in Middle-earth, the 3 hunters' pendants blazed with such light that birds fled from the sky and flowers bloomed out of season. Yet it was not a warning of danger, but of recognition. The crystal staves of the Khandi were fragments of the same source that had created the Covenant Stone, pieces of the original music of creation that had been scattered across the world when the Valar first shaped Arda. "We are the Eastern Watch," explained their leader, a woman whose eyes held depths that rivaled those of the Eldar. "For 3 ages, we have guarded the Sunrise Lands against shadows that would creep in from the void beyond. We knew that one day our watch and yours would join, for the music that made us both rings with the same harmony." The joining of the Eastern and Western Watches marked the beginning of what historians would later call the true Fourth Age. For the first time since the creation of the world, the guardianship of hope was shared across all the lands of Arda, from the Grey Havens to the Yellow Mountains, from the Ice Bay of Foroshel to the great desert that lay beyond Harad. But with expansion came new complexity. The Eastern Watchers brought word of threats that the hunters had never imagined. Cities of the dead in the deep desert, where preserved corpses of ancient kings stirred with malevolent purpose. Forests of iron trees that sang with voices of the damned. And strangest of all, places where the very fabric of reality had worn thin, allowing glimpses into other versions of Arda where the shadow had triumphed and corrupted everything that lived. The world is larger and stranger than we ever knew, mused Thrandion as he studied the maps and reports brought by the Eastern ambassadors. Perhaps it was always so, and we simply lacked the vision to see beyond our own borders. The integration of the Eastern and Western watches required new techniques, new wisdom, and new forms of cooperation. Grimjaw's stone wardens learned to work with the Kandi crystal singers, whose staves could detect corruption in the very foundations of the earth. Thrandian's forest healers exchanged knowledge with the desert walkers, who could read the signs of spiritual poison in the patterns of wind-blown sand. Mithrelas's memory stones were enhanced with Eastern technique for preserving not just individual experiences, but the collective wisdom of entire community. The Sixth Watch, years 301-400 after the renewal. The 4th century of their guardianship brought challenges that tested everything the Watchers had learned. From the ruins of Numenor itself, preserved in the depths of the Sundering Sea, came artifacts of such power that merely approaching them could drive lesser beings mad. Pirates and treasure seekers had begun diving to the drowned palaces, bringing up cursed crowns and scepters that radiated the ancient pride and corruption that had doomed the island kingdom. The 3 hunters, now aided by their eastern counterparts, mounted expedition after expedition to the drowned land, seeking to contain or destroy the artifact before they could spread their poison to the world above. What they found in the depths challenged their understanding of corruption itself. These are not evil, as we understand, reported Mithrelas after her first dive to the ruins of Armenelos. They are beauty and greatness and achievement, but twisted by the belief that such things justify any means of obtaining them. In their way, they are more dangerous than any orc blade or Nazgul fire, for they corrupt through pride rather than fear. The Numenorian artifacts required a new approach to containment. Traditional methods of destruction simply released their influence into the surrounding area. Instead, the Watchers learned to neutralize them through deliberate acts of humility and service. A crown that whispered promises of dominion could be cleansed by being worn while tending to the sick. A scepter that granted power over others' minds could be purified by using it to dig wells for the thirsty. Pride is not destroyed by humiliation, Thrandion observed, but by service freely chosen. The artifacts remember their maker's sin, but they can learn new purposes if we teach them through our action. But even as they dealt with threats from the past, new challenges emerged from the changing world around them. The great forests were shrinking as men expanded their kingdom. The old alliances between the free peoples were strained by competing needs and interests. Most troubling of all, some among the younger generation of Watchers began to question whether their vigilance was still necessary. The great evils are defeated, argued one young guardian from Rohan. Sauron is destroyed, the Nazgul are scattered, even the dragons are no more. Why do we maintain a watch against shadows that no longer threaten the world? The answer came sooner than any of them wished. From the deep places beneath the arid Luin, something stirred that had slept since the elder days. Not a Balrog, for those were all accounted for, but something older and stranger. The dwarves who first encountered it reported that it was made not of shadow and flame, but of crystallized music, a fragment of the discord that Melkor had introduced into the original Song of Creation. The battle against the discord fragment lasted 7 years and required the combined efforts of nearly 100 Watchers from both east and west. Unlike any enemy they had faced before, it could not be fought with sword or spell, for it existed primarily as sound and vibration. Instead, it had to be contained through harmony. Dozens of crystal staves and pendants working in concert to create a resonance that would lock the discord back into the crystalline prison from which it had escaped. The victory was hard-won and came at great cost. 12 Watchers gave their lives to the harmonic binding, their final breaths used to sing the notes that sealed the prison. Among them was Grimjaw's own son, who had joined the Stone Wardens in his youth and rose to become one of their greatest leaders. The watch continued. Grimjaw spoke at his son's funeral, his voice steady despite the tears in his ancient eyes, not because the need is great or small, but because some things must be preserved regardless of the cost. Hope is not a luxury that can be set aside when times are peaceful. It is the foundation upon which all peaceful times rest. The seventh watch, years 401-500 after the renewal. As the 5th century of their guardianship dawned, the 3 original hunters faced a challenge they had long dreaded, the question of succession. Thrandion remained essentially unchanged by the passage of time, but Grimjaw, despite his dwarvish longevity, was clearly nearing the end of his allotted years. Mithrelas, sustained by her Numenorian blood and the power of her crystal shard, appeared to have aged no more than a decade or two, but she spoke increasingly of feeling the weight of centuries upon her spirit. "We were meant to be guardian, not immortal overlord," she said during one of their councils. "The Watchers look to us for wisdom, but wisdom cannot flow freely from sources that have become too remote from the lives of those they guide." The solution they devised was both elegant and painful. Rather than simply choosing successors and stepping aside, they began the process of gradual transfer, teaching selected Watchers not just their techniques and knowledge, but allowing them to experience, through enhanced memory stone, the actual memories and decision-making processes that had guided the original 3 through 5 centuries of guardianship. The process was exhausting for all involved. The recipient Watchers had to expand their minds to contain not just their own experiences, but the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The original hunters had to learn to gradually release their tight grip on the responsibility they had carried for so long. But the process bore unexpected fruit. As the new generation of senior Watchers took on greater responsibilities, they brought fresh perspectives that the original 3 had lost through long familiarity with their burden. Where the hunters had become cautious and conservative, carefully managing known threats, the new Watchers were more willing to take risks in pursuit of proactive solutions. It was a group of these newer Watchers who proposed and executed the Great Cleansing, a coordinated effort to purify every known site of ancient corruption in Middle-earth simultaneously. The plan would have been impossible for the original 3 to conceive, requiring as it did the coordination of over 300 Watchers across multiple continents. But the new generation had grown up thinking in terms of vast networks and shared consciousness. The Great Cleansing took place during the spring equinox of the 402nd year after the renewal. From the Barrow Downs to the ruins of Isengard, from the Morgul Vale to the ancient battlefields of the War of Wrath, teams of Watchers worked in perfect synchronization to burn away the last lingering traces of shadow that had haunted Middle-earth for millennia. The effort was visible from space. Had there been anyone to see it, points of brilliant light blazing across the continent like stars fallen to Earth. The accumulated negativity of ages burned away in a matter of hours, leaving behind not emptiness, but possibility. Lands that had been barren for centuries bloomed with new life. Waters that had run bitter or stagnant became sweet and clear. Even the weather seemed to shift, as if the very atmosphere had been cleansed of some subtle poison. But the greatest change was in the people themselves. Across Middle-earth, there was a collective sigh of relief as burdens they hadn't even known they carried were lifted from their shoulders. Artists found new inspiration, lovers felt deeper connection, and children laughed with a joy that seemed to bubble up from the very earth itself. "Now," said Mithrelas, as the 3 original hunters stood on a hilltop overlooking the transformed landscape, "we can truly begin to step aside. We have given our successors not just the tools to continue our work, but a clean slate upon which to write their own chapter of guardianship." The final watch, years 501 to 546 after the renewal. The last years of the original hunters' active service were perhaps their most peaceful, but also their most profound. With the immediate threats of ancient corruption removed and a new generation of Watchers fully established, they were free to focus on deeper questions of purpose and meaning. Thrandion spent much of this time in meditation, seeking to understand the true nature of the connection between hope and the fundamental forces that shaped reality. His studies led him to develop what became known as the theory of beneficial resonance, the idea that positive emotions and intentions actually strengthened the underlying structure of the physical world, while negative emotions weakened it. Hope is not merely a state of mind, he wrote in his final treatise, "It is a force of nature as real as gravity or magnetism. When enough beings in an area hope for good outcomes, the very laws of probability shift to make those outcomes more likely. This is why evil ultimately fails, not because good is stronger in battle, but because hope itself reshapes reality to favor the hopeful." Grimjaw, despite his advancing age, threw himself into one final great project, the construction of the Archive Eternal, a vast underground complex beneath Erebor designed to preserve the knowledge and wisdom of all ages. But unlike traditional libraries, the Archive Eternal was designed to be self-sustaining and self-expanding, with crystal networks that could grow and adapt to accommodate new knowledge as it was discovered. "Memory fades and books burn," he explained to the workers as they carved the great halls from living rock. "But crystal remembers forever and grows stronger with each memory it holds. Long after we are gone, this place will stand as proof that knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied." Mithrellas undertook perhaps the most ambitious project of all, the creation of the final memory stone, designed to contain not just the experiences of individuals, but the entire emotional history of Middle-earth's journey from darkness to light. Working with techniques learned from both Eastern and Western tradition, she sought to capture the essence of what it meant to struggle against despair and emerge victorious. The process took nearly 20 years and required the cooperation of thousands of volunteers from every people and profession. Farmers shared their memories of coaxing life from difficult soil. Mothers shared the moment of holding their newborn children. Warriors shared not their victories, but the instant when they chose to protect the innocent rather than seek glory. Artists shared the joy of creation, and healers shared the satisfaction of mending what was broken. When the final memory stone was complete, it contained within its crystal matrix the distilled essence of hope itself, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing reality that could be experienced by anyone who touched it. The stone became the centerpiece of a new shrine built where the three paths from Gondor, Rohan, and the Woodland Realm converged, and pilgrims came from across the world to experience, for just a moment, what it felt like to hope with the accumulated strength of an entire age. The departure. It was in the 546th year, after the renewal, that the time finally came for the three original hunters to lay down their burden. The ceremony was simple, held at dawn on the same date they had first taken their oath in the Lost Glen. The new generation of senior watchers stood ready to receive the ultimate responsibility, and the crystal pendant network that now spanned the world pulsed with readiness for the transition. Grimjaw was the first to speak, his voice still strong despite his great age. "5 centuries and more have I carried this burden, and I am grateful for every day of it. To serve hope is to serve the best that lives within all thinking beings. May those who come after us prove worthy of the trust, and may the watch never end until the world itself finds peace." He removed his pendant and placed it in the hands of his chosen successor, a young dwarf woman whose eyes held the same fire for justice that had driven him in his youth. As the crystal left his hand, Grimjaw seemed to shrink slightly, as if the weight of years had finally caught up with him, but his smile was radiant with satisfaction. Thrandian spoke next, his ageless voice carrying the music of leaves and starlight. "Time flowed like a river, and we have been privileged to stand guard at its banks for longer than most mortals can imagine. The current changes, but the river endures. May those who take up our watch remember that they guard not just the present moment, but all the moments yet to come." His pendant went to a half-elven woman who had spent decades healing the scars left by ancient battle. As she accepted the crystal, the very air around her seemed to shimmer with possibility. Finally, Mithrellas stepped forward, her pendant blazing with a light that had grown stronger rather than weaker over the century. "We have learned that hope is not passive waiting, but active choice. Each day, each hour, each moment, we choose hope over despair, light over darkness, love over fear. This choice is the greatest magic in all the world, and it belongs not to the mighty, but to every heart that beats with courage." Her chosen successor was unexpected, not a warrior or scholar, but a simple gardener from the Shire whose greatest talent was knowing exactly what each plant needed to flourish. As the pendant settled around his neck, he smiled with the quiet confidence of one who understood that tending hope was much like tending a garden, requiring patience, persistence, and faith in the eventual harvest. With the formal transfer complete, the three original hunters stood together one last time as guardians of the Watch. Their successors bowed deeply, not in worship, but in gratitude for the path that had been cleared for them. "The Watch continues," they said in unison, and the words echoed across Middle-earth through the crystal network, carrying reassurance to every corner of the world that hope remained vigilant. The afterword. The three hunters did not disappear or fade away after laying down their burden. Instead, they found new purposes that grew naturally from the wisdom they had gained. Thrandion returned to the woodland realm and became a teacher, not of combat or statecraft, but of the art of seeing beauty in simple things. His students learned to find wonder in dewdrops and lessons in the changing seasons, understanding that the greatest magic was often the most ordinary. Grimjaw, despite his age, refused to retire completely. He became the keeper of the Archive Eternal, greeting each new visitor with enthusiasm and helping them find exactly the knowledge they needed. He took particular joy in showing children through the crystal halls, watching their eyes light up as they discovered that learning could be an adventure as exciting as any quest. Mithrelas established a hospice for those whose time in Middle-earth was ending, helping them prepare for whatever lay beyond the circles of the world. Her greatest gift was helping people understand that death was not the opposite of hope, but its ultimate expression, the faith that something beautiful waited beyond the horizon of mortal sight. Years passed, and gradually the three original hunters were spoken of more as legends than as living people. But those who sought them out could still find them, usually in quiet places, often doing simple tasks with great care and attention. They had learned that true guardianship was not about grand gestures or dramatic battles, but about tending the small daily flames of hope that burned in every heart. When Grimjaw finally passed into the halls of his fathers, his last words were, "The stone remembers all who touch it, and love remembers all who give it. We are never truly gone, while memory and love endure." Thrandion eventually sailed into the west, but not before establishing a school where mortals could learn something of the elven understanding of time. Not as a river flowing in one direction, but as an ocean in which all moments existed simultaneously. His final gift to Middle-earth was the knowledge that past, present, and future were connected in ways that made every act of hope resonate across all ages. Mithrelas lived longest of the three, her Númenórean heritage granting her years beyond the span of normal mortal. When her time finally came, she gathered her students around her and shared her final wisdom. Hope is the only treasure that grows larger when shared, the only light that burns brighter when given away, the only power that becomes stronger when surrendered. Remember this, and the Watch will never truly end. And indeed, the Watch has never ended. In every generation, in every corner of Middle-earth and beyond, there are those who choose to stand vigil against the darkness, not because they are commanded to do so, but because they understand that hope is not a gift to be received, but a gift to be given. The crystal network established by the three hunters continues to pulse with life, connecting watchers across vast distances and disparate cultures. New threats arise and are met. New challenges emerge and are overcome. New wonders are discovered and shared. The world changes, but the fundamental choice between hope and despair remains constant. And in every age, there are those wise enough to choose hope, brave enough to guard it, and generous enough to share it with all who need its light. Thus ends the chronicle of the hunters of the lost Glen. But their story continues in every heart that chooses courage over fear, in every hand extended in friendship, in every voice raised in song against the silent. For they learned the greatest secret of all, that hope is not something that happens to us, but something we make happen. One choice at a time, one moment at a time, one heart at a time, until all the world blazes with its light. Here ends the Chronicle of the Watchers, as recorded in the final years of the Fourth Age and preserved in the Archive Eternal beneath the mountain of Erebor. May all who read these words remember that they too are guardians of hope and that the watch continues in their hands.